Alright, y'all. I don't even know why I have to make this video. I really shouldn't need to, but I've seen a lot of delusional fans lately saying that Jimmy Garoppolo is a terrible quarterback. He can't do anything. He can only throw. He's a game manager. He can't run, yada, yada, yada. So I'm here to just set the facts straight and educate y'all today. Jimmy Garoppolo is undoubtedly a top 12 quarterback in the NFL. So before I get into it, let me identify the guys who I think are better than Jimmy Garoppolo, and there's 11 of them. And they are Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Russell Wilson, Drew Brees, Deshaun Watson, Aaron Rodgers, Carson Wentz, Matt Ryan, Dak Prescott, Matthew Stafford, and Kirk Cousins, who a lot of people argue that Jimmy is better than, but at this point in their careers, I don't see it yet. So that means I have Jimmy Garoppolo as the 12th best quarterback in the league. So that sticks true to my point, undoubtedly a top 12 quarterback. So how I'm going to do this video is I'm going to compare Jimmy Garoppolo to some guys that I've seen ranked higher than him on some lists. And those guys that I'm going to be comparing him to are Josh Allen, Ryan Tannehill, Kyler Murray, and I'm going to take a deep dive into Kyler Murray because I am tired of seeing all these delusional Cardinal fans out there. Tom Brady, Jared Goff, Derek Carr, Phillip Rivers, Ben Roethlisberger, and Baker Mayfield. So before I compare the stats, let's just put up Jimmy's stats real quick. Last season, he had 476 pass attempts and put up 3,978 yards, a 69.1 completion percentage, 248 yards per game, 27 touchdowns, 8.4 yards per attempt, 13 interceptions, a 102 rating according to Pro Football Reference, and all of this while going 13-3 and leading the 49ers to the Super Bowl. Now let's begin comparing him with the guys I previously mentioned, starting with Josh Allen. And when we look at his stats, he has significantly fewer yards, touchdowns, yards per game, yards per attempt, and wins, while also having a lower completion percentage and a lower rating. All of this while throwing 15 less passes, which is really not significant at all. And the only stats that is better than Garoppolo's is interceptions. Now, most of y'all are going to make the argument that he's the better rusher, which is true, and I'm not going to deny that. But when you have that significant of a drop-off in passing stats as a quarterback, it really doesn't make a difference at all. And I also don't want to hear he will be better because that has nothing to do with who the best quarterback is now. That's like saying Joe Burrow is already a better quarterback than Drew Brees. So Jimmy Garoppolo is easily better than Josh Allen. We can move on. Next guy is Ryan Tannehill. So to be fair to Tannehill, I'm going to avoid comparing yards and touchdowns since he didn't play in all 16 games. And to be fair to Jimmy, I'm going to exclude interceptions for this comparison as well. But even though once we exclude those, Tannehill still has less yards per game and a lower win percentage. So most people are going to point out his rate, yards per attempt, completion percentage for Tannehill, to say that he's better than Jimmy G. And this is where I'm going to put up this stat. EPA impact from passes dropped. And as you can see, Jimmy and Tannehill have a difference of 50 EPA lost. So Tannehill's completion percentage isn't really telling the truth when we're comparing it to other quarterbacks' completion percentage, such as Jimmy Garoppolo's. Now, the yards per attempt is also understandable because of the Titans system. They got guys like A.J. Brown, Corey Davis, who are deep ball threats, whereas for the Niners, they didn't really have any deep ball threats besides Emmanuel Sanders, who only played 8 full games for us. And we really only saw a few deep passes to him. So obviously the yards per attempt is going to be understandably higher for Tannehill. And while we're on the topic of deep ball, this stat here shows that Jimmy Garoppolo is a more accurate deep ball passer than Ryan Tannehill. So after that, that really only leaves us with one higher rating, and that rating is rating itself, which really, if you understand football, doesn't tell you too much about a quarterback. So to summarize, Jimmy has the higher yards per game, higher win percentage, but the stats that Tannehill has the better number for is kind of obvious because of the system he's in. And also not to mention that he didn't start a full season, which is a crucial factor you have to factor in when comparing two guys. So once again, another quarterback who's not as good as Jimmy Garoppolo. So now we're going to move on to Kyler Murray. Now, man, there are some delusional Cardinals fans and Seahawks fans as well that are just trying to argue that Kyler Murray is better and they can't do anything to back it up. And you can just look at my Twitter replies as an example. There's tons from this past weekend. So Kyler's argument is pretty similar with Josh Allen's. He's the better rusher, but Jimmy has significantly better stats in the pass game. And the same stats that were significantly better than Allen's for Garoppolo are also significantly better than Kyler's as well. And Kyler has a much worse record. Only thing that Kyler has better in the passing game than Jimmy Garoppolo is 1 interception compared to Josh Allen's 8. So there you have it. Also, Kyler has significantly more pass attempts than Jimmy Garoppolo as well. So this really just goes to show that he's not even close to Jimmy Garoppolo. Now, I've seen a lot of people saying that Kyler's a lot worse because he's a rookie and his system sucks. First of all, 2019 was also Jimmy Garoppolo's first year starting. And second of all, when we look at Jimmy, he was in a pretty similar system as the Cardinals with a rookie head coach and a terrible wide receiving core. And he went 5-0 with 3 of those wins coming against playoff teams, all while having only a week or two to study the playbook, whereas Kyler had 5 months to do the same thing. So Kyler's system and the fact that he was a rookie shouldn't need to factor into this at all because Jimmy proved that you don't have to go 5-10-1 in a system like that. Also, again, with the higher potential argument, I mentioned that for Josh Allen. That has nothing to do with who is currently better. So Cardinals fans, sorry to inform you, but Jimmy Garoppolo is without a doubt the better quarterback. Hope this will make y'all less toxic and less delusional. Next guy is BenRoethlisberger. Now, it is kind of hard to compare these two since Roethlisberger was out most of last season and the fact that Roethlisberger is in a significantly more pass-heavy system. But 3 things really stand out to me when comparing these two guys. Number 1, Roethlisberger was terrible in the 2 games that he played last season. Number 2, Jimmy G has the better arm. You can just watch it on film. Stats will show it. And number 3, Ben Roethlisberger has always had one of the top receiving cores in football, yet he hasn't had a completion percentage over 67% throughout his career, which goes to show that Garoppolo is by far the more accurate quarterback, because if his receivers aren't bringing the completion percentage down, then it can only mean inaccurate passes are what's bringing completion percentage down. Also, can't forget that he ran Antonio Brown out of Pittsburgh, which doesn't have too much to do with the argument, but just goes to show that Jimmy G is the better and stronger leader. So we'll see what Big Ben can do this season, but as for now, Jimmy G's better. Moving on to Jimmy G's mentor, Tom Brady, who some people still have as a top 10 quarterback today. I don't see that at all. So before we get into it, let me just get the facts straight. Is Tom Brady the GOAT? Yep. Is Tom Brady higher than Jimmy G on the all-time list? Yep. But this is a current quarterback ranking, and let me just get this also out of the way. Tom Brady regressed big time ever since that Baltimore loss in Week 9, whereas Jimmy stayed consistent throughout the entire season. And to show you that, here are Jimmy G's last 10 games compared to Russell Wilson's last 10 games, who is a top 3 quarterback. And as you can see clearly, Jimmy exceeds him in almost every stat. Now, back to Brady. When looking at his stats, he has more yards and yards per game, which is understandable because the Pats don't run the ball as much. And he has 150 more pass attempts, roughly that. And he also has less picks. And Jimmy, on the other hand, has a higher win percentage, a significantly higher completion percentage, more yards per attempt, more touchdowns, and a higher rating. So, to sum it all up, Jimmy's the more consistent quarterback. The only stats lower than his are simply because of the system Brady's in. And other than those stats, Jimmy outperforms Brady currently. So, Brady, I respect the hell out of you, but your time is up. So, after Brady, we're going to move on to the most delusional comparisons. And if people put these guys over Jimmy Garoppolo, they either A, don't watch football, B, hate Jimmy G with a passion, or C, are trolls. So, the first guy in this group is Jared Goff. Now, Goff has significantly more yards, which makes sense considering how deep their receiving core is, and the fact that they didn't rely on Gurley a lot last season. I mean, he had about 150 more pass attempts than Jimmy G, so he should have significantly more yards. Anyways, even with more yards, Goff still has fewer touchdowns, fewer yards per attempt, a lower completion percentage, a lower rating, more interceptions, the worst record, and all while having so much more weapon depth than Jimmy Garoppolo has. So the fact that he has significantly more yards and significantly worse stats than Garoppolo should make it clear that he's not better than Jimmy G. Now, the next guy is Derek Carr. Now, I actually think, looking back at this, Carr doesn't belong in this delusional comparison group. I actually think he's kind of underrated. But Carr's stats actually surprised me a lot still. He has a higher completion percentage, more yards, slightly more yards per game, and fewer interceptions. And on the other hand, Jimmy Garoppolo has the better record, more yards per attempt, more touchdowns, and a better rating. Now, once again, as I brought up in the Goff comparison, if you have more attempts, you should have a higher completion percentage, along with more yards and yards per game. And Carr had around 50 more pass attempts than Jimmy G, and only the slimmest margin for the upper hand in those stats than Jimmy G. So that really doesn't tell too much. In fact, he should have more of an upper hand than Jimmy G. So the fact that Carr has significantly fewer touchdowns and fewer yards per attempt is definitely concerning. Now, let's look at their systems. So even though Jimmy has an offensive guru and Kyle Shanahan as head coach, Derek Carr has arguably the best quarterback coach of all time in John Gruden. So in my opinion, Carr should have significantly better stats considering he's the main focus in that offense, whereas Jimmy really isn't, but Carr doesn't. In fact, some could argue that he has worse stats than Jimmy Garoppolo, like me. Also, I've seen people say that he's never had a number one weapon in his offense, but he had Amari Cooper for a while, and looking at his best season, which was 2016, with Amari Cooper, his averages, so yards per attempt, yards per game, completion percentage, and rating, are significantly worse than his 2019 season. So when he had a number one receiver, he hasn't really excelled. So Carr doesn't really belong in this delusional comparison group, but my point still stands. He's not as good as Jimmy Garoppolo. Next up is Phillip Rivers. So let's just get the obvious out of the way. He has significantly more yards and yards per game, significantly more passes, and a significantly better receiving core. So just by looking at that, he should be excelling, right? Not really. Rivers has less yards per attempt, less touchdowns, a lower rating, worse record, and the most glaring, significantly more interceptions, which is somewhat understandable, but when the difference is that big when comparing two guys, it's a pretty glaring difference. So, in other words, Rivers wasn't really excelling in a system where he should have excelled, while Jimmy excelled in his system. And that's why you guys see me doubt about the Colts a lot, because I really don't think Rivers is going to do well after last season's regression. But anyways, Rivers' time is up, and Jimmy Garoppolo is better than him. Now, the last guy in this group, and I don't know how on earth people think this guy's better than Jimmy Garoppolo, and that's Baker Mayfield. Now, to be fair, he's had terrible coaching throughout his career, so his stats could be low because of that, but when people bring that fact up, they're basically just saying he's unproven, and if he's unproven, then you can't really compare him with any quarterback in the league since he hasn't shown who he truly is as a player. But anyways, for the people saying that he is proven and is a better quarterback than Jimmy G, Baker has a significantly better receiving core, yet significantly lower completion percentage, fewer yards and yards per game, with roughly 60 more pass attempts, fewer touchdowns, significantly more interceptions, a lower rating, and a worse record. I really don't need to say anymore. So one last thing before I end the video, I've been seeing a lot of people say that Jimmy G's not clutch, and if you think that, then watch the Steelers game, watch both Cardinals games from last year, watch the Saints game, watch the second Rams game, watch the Titans game, watch the Bears game from 2017, and if you're still not convinced, then it's obvious that you do not watch football. So there you have it. I really did not need to make this video. It's really obvious that Jimmy G is a top 12 quarterback. I mean, if you want to debate it, DM me on Twitter, but it's really not worth doing since you're not going to win. And if I didn't mention the quarterback, it's because they aren't even remotely close to Jimmy's level. So, yeah. Hope I educated y'all.